Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming. Certainly, thanks, Troy. Thanks, Jose, for the remarks. It's just a tremendously exciting time for us to be up here and talking about this topic, and I think for those of us working in the cybersecurity field, the broader technology field, it's just a tremendously exciting time. And I think, and you may be reacting to that comment and say, well, exciting, from a cyber perspective, how could it be exciting? We're having new threats every day, we've got competing resources, it seems like there's new breaches every day, and that's all that's true, and all that presents challenges, but at the same time, it presents a lot of opportunity, as Jose was just sharing. And we'll talk about some of that as we get in through this session and through the panel conversation and through the morning. So it's just a tremendously exciting time, I think, for those of us working in the industry. Several examples that we'll be talking about. Yeah, next slide, Kurt. There we go. Several examples up here, and that where automation or artificial intelligence can certainly benefit. And there's a couple specific examples that aren't necessarily reflected in the slide that I've been in several meetings recently with government executives and other colleagues that we've been talking about some of the significant challenges a lot of agencies are facing. And one of them is around HSPD 12, the program, just the provisioning aspects of it, the onboarding, the offboarding. It's can be a very cumbersome process. A lot of agencies are struggling with that, and so that's a perfect example where automation could really lend itself to support an effort like that. The next one that jumps to mind is the risk management framework. I see a lot of nods. I know there's a lot of us in the room that have been navigating through an RMF process, taking systems to the accreditation stage. Obviously, a very cumbersome process, a lot of manual activities. For those of us that work in the cybersecurity field, there's probably no better example than RMF that can be automated. And so we'll talk more about that as we move through. So we'll definitely talk about a couple more examples as we move through the morning, but those were a couple that were kind of on my mind. A couple other key points that we wanted to make sure we cover is there's certainly a myth around artificial intelligence, specifically around government. Now, when you think of the corporate and the commercial world, the concept of artificial intelligence and automation, there's obviously a profit motive there. You're trying to be more efficient. You're trying to do more with less. From a government perspective, for a lot of us in the room, either contractors or government folks, that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I know sometimes there is that myth out there that automation is going to take jobs away. If I automate this task, all of a sudden I'm not going to have a job anymore. And I think one of the key themes that we're trying to carry forward is that's not the case. In fact, what it does is if we're automating some of these types of tasks that we're talking about, it enables the cybersecurity professionals to actually focus on more challenging tasks, to dedicate their time and their energy to things that are more challenging versus the more mundane types of tasks that Jose was referring to. So I think that's a key myth that hopefully all of us walk out of here with. It isn't when we're talking automation, artificial intelligence, it's not that we're trying to do away with jobs necessarily in the government sector. We're just trying to be more efficient and put our best resources from a cyber perspective on the most difficult challenges. The other key point that I wanted to bring up, and I just talked to Jose briefly about getting his perspective on this, is obviously with a lot of the automation and artificial intelligence, those concepts, given how fast they move, they don't necessarily lend themselves well to traditional government acquisition processes that can take some time. So certainly when we move into Q&A or later we'll get Jose's perspective on this around some enhanced acquisition methods to facilitate that, pilot programs, and certainly when we go into, we'd certainly be interested in your all's perspectives who've been involved with pilots. But also OTAs, other transaction authority types of acquisitions, which lend themselves well to this type of capability, where you can get a capability in quickly, get it under pilot, and really move it into production quickly. So we can certainly talk more about that, but that's a key theme that we'll need to get some perspective on. So I'll turn to Kirk in a minute, but before I do, I wanted to give just a quick personal story that resonated for me as we were kind of preparing for this session. I won't mention any names, but I recently ordered an online CD. For those of you who, I think everybody may know what a CD is, but for those of you who don't remember, a compact disc. It was actually a compact disc that I ordered off of an online provider, and I was so excited because this particular group, I've been looking for a live album for them for a long time, finally popped up on this online provider. And then, so I ordered it. The next day I get an email from that provider, from a supply chain provider for that online servicer, and it said that your our service, our company has suffered a cyber breach. You need to cancel your order. So there's a number, obviously putting my cyber hat on, your alarm bells start to go off, because the first reaction is, well, just because I cancel my order doesn't mean my data is protected. Now you've been breached, now I've been breached, so we'll deal with that another day. But then the pessimist also said, well, given how quickly, the point is this was an automated email. Nobody actually typed up an email and sent it to me as an individual customer. This was an automated email. So the pessimist in me said, well, they obviously sent it quickly, so hopefully, or what that means is they've probably been breached before. So that's not a good sign. But then the optimist in me, going back to the point about being excited about this, what we're dealing with right now, is they actually had the foresight to, rather than type up an email and send it to a customer, they automated that process, so that I get an automated email to say, this is what's happening. And so hopefully what that means is their best and brightest cyber professionals are now dealing with researching that threat, how it happened, and how to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the optimist in me that's hopefully saying that that's what they're doing. So I think that's a good example that resonated for me in terms of translating how automation can be brought to bear in many ways from a government perspective. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Kirk, who will talk a little bit more about kind of the classes and the types of automation, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and we're going to keep this a dialogue between Tony and I, because the last thing you want to do is hear me talk for the entirety of this program. But one thing I wanted to highlight on this particular slide, and Tony mentioned it, and even Jose kind of mentioned it, was the whole idea of a cyber talent shortage. I mean, every organization that we talk to has a cyber talent shortage, and frankly, it's probably one of the most critical security risks that we have in the federal government. And I think, you know, when we look at ways to better utilize our resources, as Tony has mentioned, using automation is a great way to use the cognitive activities of that cyber workforce to really benefit the security posture of our agencies. So I think that is one of the key benefits of how automation can be used to simply augment the current cyber workforce because of that resource constraint that we have. So what I wanted to do is briefly go over what we consider intelligent automation. And there's a lot of terminology, a lot of different vernacular out there around AI, RPA. You heard Jose talk about that. So we at KPMG took it upon ourselves to try to delineate the different, and Tony mentioned this, classes of automation or intelligent automation. And so what we call intelligent automation is really a continuum of capabilities and technologies across what we call three different classes of intelligent automation. And there's a number of reasons why we did this. Two being, one, we wanted to clarify, you know, what all these acronyms meant, and two, put them in a way that we could actually talk to our clients about in a tactical manner, and not you know, talk at a high level and say this is generally what it is, but really apply the right capability, the right technology to the right use case. So it's not meant to be a maturity curve, but it's simply meant to be a way to apply the right capability to the right use case. So I'm going to walk through this briefly, and then Tony and I are going to kind of talk through some of the potential use cases that you could apply to the cyber realm. I'm going to go from the left to right, not meant to be a maturity curve, but really think about this as on the left side of the slide, you're really acting like a human. It's really the arms and legs of automation. And on the opposite side, the right side, it's really thinking and providing hypotheses and judgment to the human to make better decisions. So think about arms and legs on the left and think about the brain on the right. So the first class is really what we call basic process automation, very much rules-based. This is where you find robotics process automation, or RPA. And there's really, if you think about the intelligence of automation, this is really, I'll call them dumb bots, right? They're going to do exactly what you tell them to do. You're going to configure these bots to automate a certain process, and it's going to do exactly what it's supposed to be doing every single time. Nights and weekends, you know, holidays, they don't take smoke breaks, whatever it is. So, you know, you're essentially taking a process and taking the mundane away from the human so that they can focus on the more value-added activities, the more critical thinking. And so you'll see a lot of vendors in this space that are really focusing on setting up their platforms on-prem or even in the cloud to instantiate automation of certain processes, either in the back office. We're seeing a lot of finance and accounting, a lot of cyber use cases, which we'll talk about today, all the way to the front office for things like entitlement eligibility, application processing. So again, you're talking about workflow automation. Anyone built an Excel macro in the room? consider it an Excel macro, right, across the presentation layer, across the desktop, logging into multiple systems. Really, and the thing that Jose mentioned that I liked was the legacy system environment, right? You're using RPA to integrate that legacy environment at the presentation layer by having the bots log in, pull the requisite data, enter that data into a secondary or tertiary system. So really effective ways at a low investment level to automate at that presentation layer. So a lot of agencies are starting with Class 1 RPA. They're starting with proofs of concept. We're doing a lot of those as we speak at different agencies, whether it's defense, intel, civilian, or healthcare. And it's really exciting, some of the ROI that we're getting out of these. In fact, one agency that we're working with, it was going to take, because of the backlog of documents, it was going to take 15 years for one person to get through the entirety of the documents. We got it down to 3 months with one automation. Now, if we apply multiple automations, we're actually going to get that down to 2, 3, 4 weeks. And we went from an average 45 minutes processing per document down to a little over 2 minutes. So the ROI, as mentioned, is in the 80% range in many cases. So it's very exciting. Class 2, and I'm going to move a little bit quicker here. Class 2, it's funny, there's an event upstairs, and I saw this around chatbots. A lot of the idea of chatbots sit here. Chatbots is essentially a cognitive automation that uses natural language processing coupled with things like RPA in the back end to link up the data sets that is basically queried by a user chatting or using voice. And so you're adding natural language processing to a lot of the automations that are out there to essentially make the user experience more seamless. From a cyber perspective, think about password resets. A lot of agencies are looking at chatbots for their help desks to actually automate password resets because it's a very simple way. You're already authenticated on the system through whatever you're using, Skype for Business, and it's allowing you to actually reset your password without having to call someone or submit a ticket in ServiceNow or Remedy or whatever ticketing system you're using. So the idea of learning capabilities, natural language processing is critical for Class 2, and then over time, these chatbots observe and get smarter as you interact with them. So very exciting technologies. Also, OCR, advanced OCR, optical character recognition, is a very common thing with Class 2. And the 45-minute to 2-minute example is what we're doing in there for NLP. And then cognitive automation, this is where true AI sits. This is where you've got machine learning, advanced neural networks that are really looking to provide confidence in certain judgments that humans can then take action on. So I think the idea of having that data strategy, having that data lake or data layer is critical for the success of Class 3 solutions, simply because a lot of folks think, well, I just throw a bunch of data into a box, it spits out a result. And that's not how it works. You really have to take time to make sure that your data strategy is established, the metadata is established, and that you've got a way to train the system so that it understands and increases its confidence intervals over time. So the really exciting things, and this is where you see the Watsons, the Google DeepMinds, Google Cloud Platform, Wipro Homes that sit in this realm. And so this is very exciting. A little bit more investment in this area, a little bit more data-heavy, cognitive analytics, but it's a really exciting time for that. So that's kind of what we call the classes of intelligent automation. And again, you'll probably see different vernacular out there, but the analysts have taken this as well. And if you read up on HFS or Gartner, they're starting to kind of segment things into different classes as well. So wanted to make sure we covered that before we moved into this. And so Tony and I are going to kind of tag team here and talk about some potential cybersecurity use cases. And we're actually going to show you a demo, and it was, we didn't plan this, but Jose did a great job of setting up our demo. It's a very similar use case around identity and access management, around user provisioning. And so, when we think about, again, the cyber workforce shortage, we have to look for ways to use automation to supplement our workforce and augment the way that we're doing our business. And so there's a couple examples over here that I'd like to hit, and then Tony, you can jump in here too. But when you look at access certification, I mean, a great example that Jose brought up was, I've got to check a number of different systems. I've got to look for eligibility on roles-based access to make sure the person has been appropriately approved in the system, that we have user sign-offs. There's a lot of emails that go back and forth. And so automation can be used to take a lot of that transactional activity out of the actual end user objective, which is to simply say, you have least privileged access to the system that you need, right? And so, we're going to show you a demo in a minute of how can we use automation to automate some of that really mundane transactional type activity. and really focus on the threat vectors that are out there in the network. So Tony, I'll let you kind of interrupt me and we can tag team on some of these, but I thought it was helpful to at least align you to what those three classes are as we talk through some of the use cases.
And just curious, by a show of hands, have we had any folks out there who've spent time reviewing audit trails, network traffic logs, things like that? And that's exactly the type of automation we're talking about that Kurt just alluded to. And I know there's initiatives underway, there's different pilots underway, but we spend a lot of time interacting with information system security officers they're just pulling their hair out trying to review audit trail data. And then not only to just review the data, but then to more importantly figure out, are there real vulnerabilities and threats in that data? And just trying to figure that out is just a challenge. So automating that type of activity is just a tremendous use case to just, if nothing else, free those ISOs up to go do more important jobs, to be thinking about threat vectors and that type of thing. So there's just so many use cases around cybersecurity, and I would challenge any of us that if anybody is doing any kind of manual rote task involving cybersecurity, as we've just already alluded to, there's a bunch of examples up here, we need to be looking at how to automate that. It's just, there's so many examples and so much low-hanging fruit that can be automated to give the opportunity for our cyber professionals to do more important and challenging tasks. Not only because of the shortage of resources, but in many cases to keep them interested and keep them challenged so they can deal with the more significant task and develop their careers and versus just reviewing audit trail data every day. That just it gets to be very, very cumbersome, very time-consuming.
And I would add that and you guys have heard this at other similar events. The velocity, the veracity, and the volume of data related to cyber is overwhelming for the shortage of cyber warriors that we have. And so you need these tools really to keep your head above water in many cases. And so a lot of we're vendor agnostic, but a lot of the vendors out there are looking for ways to build in artificial intelligence, pattern recognition into the data ingest that they have with some of their tools. And so that's a great way to use what we would consider class 3 or cognitive automation to sift through those data sets and to really understand what are the threat vectors that we need to be focusing on. And moreover, we need to understand how do we reallocate against those transactional tasks and put the analysts on those data-heavy tasks so that you can actually see what the threat vectors are. And I want to also mention that, if we talk about class 1 or even 2 and 3, you can automate with your existing architectures. You don't have to go out and decommission your sale point or whatever. You can use RPA or even some of the class 3 solutions out there with your current architecture and your current environment, because it essentially is taking the data in your current environment and finding ways to sift through that data and look for patterns, look for threats. And again, I like the analogy of our perimeter is expanding further and further. Our endpoints are now mobile and geographically dispersed. So the whole idea of defense in depth has kind of changed its perspective. And so how do you monitor that? And so, well, maybe there's a threat vector that's coming from a certain region that we typically don't have people in. Well, we wouldn't know that by having 2 people look at audit logs of 1 million records of cyber threats. So how do we use things that are in the class 3 realm or RPA to free up those individuals to focus on some of those anomalies that wouldn't normally be addressed?
Yeah, and to build on that point just quickly, and then we'll do our video, and then we'll do some Q&A
Sure.
as well. But to build on that point, one of the challenges we're seeing, and many of you probably have some perspective around this too, is given it is a very exciting time, there's so many new technologies coming out all the time, there's a tendency to go grab that shiny object and pull that in, pull this tool in, pull that tool in, and it's going to help me. It's the silver bullet. It's going to do what I need it to do. And what we're finding oftentimes is having governance around those tools from, in this case, an artificial intelligence perspective is critical, because there's so many examples, and I'm sure many of you have lived through this, where you go get a tool and you don't necessarily have the folks that really know how to work it that well, and you're not, and the next thing, okay, well, we'll get that tool, and then let's go get this tool. And next thing you got 15 tools that aren't necessarily doing what you need them to do. So really, I think it's critical as you kind of think about the automation capabilities and your opportunities to be thinking about making sure you have that governance structure around the tools and capabilities you're looking at. So.
And we've done that with many organizations. There's been one organization in particular, I can't name it, but it's a very large organization that we built over 1,000 automations on the class 1 side. And to Tony's point, we realized that at the 100th automation that we really need to get our arms and legs around the automation governance. So we set up a center of excellence to really provide an ingest process, standard compliance, security over the idea of automating a lot of these processes, many of which were cyber related, because again, you're going to have a lot of the businesses out there wanting to take part in this and understand, how do I get a piece of this automation thing, because I don't have enough people to really do everything that we're doing. So governance is extremely critical in this arena. And the other thing too, as a former IT security auditor, I would say that the nice thing about especially Class 1 is when you run these automations and they're doing things that are very transactional, they do have complete audit trails, right? That you do understand what the automation has done, even more so than monitoring a human. And think insider threat. I mean, insider threat, you don't have to worry about a bot accessing data that it shouldn't have access to. So there's other challenges that we're dealing with on the human factor that can also be addressed with some of the automations. And again, you really want to find a way to augment the workforce, provide governance around it. So if we have time, what I'd like to do is maybe show a demo, and I think we're set up over here on kind of what we did with Class 1 RPA and some other things around identity and access management using automation. So if we could cue the video, please.
IT help desk administrators receive hundreds of requests each day to change system user access privileges that take hours to days to resolve. Speeding up system access requests allows employees to be productive faster. Organizations can also maintain security and compliance processes with more accurate user access. Current identity and access management systems typically only connect to 40 to 50% of an enterprise's applications through out-of-box or custom connectors. Complex legacy applications require extensive development or cannot be supported at all. This is where robotic process automation can help. This video demonstrates how we can use RPA to manage system identity access, including adding, disabling, enabling, and deleting users with the click of a button. This sample user, Amanda Ross, needs access to an application that requires a user profile within the mainframe system to be created first. Amanda logs into the Identity and Access Management tool under her profile and requests a mainframe TN3270 profile to be created so she can access the required application. Amanda successfully submits her request via the Identity Access Management tool, request number 61. The system routes the request for approval to her manager, Jerry Bennett. Jerry logs in to see Amanda's request in his queue. He clicks Approve to automatically trigger the software bot to create Amanda's mainframe user profile under the username A. Ross. The bot runs in the background and makes the change immediately once it's approved. Once the bot runs, Amanda logs into the tool and the mainframe application and views her new profile. To demonstrate the next capability, the Help Desk Administrator logs into the Identity and Access Management tool to request Amanda's mainframe account be disabled. The system routes the request to Amanda's manager for approval. Jerry logs in to see the request in his queue. Jerry's approval automatically triggers the bot to disable Amanda's account within the mainframe application in seconds. The bot can follow similar steps to automate other events, including action for bulk transactions. All user lifecycle events for an application can be automated and fully integrated with identity and access management systems. KPMG uses RPA, machine learning, and natural language processing as more cost-effective and efficient identity management options to connect complex applications that are difficult to integrate. One step in helping clients revolutionize the way they do business.
So real quick, that was just a very simple depiction of how you could use Class 1 RPA to integrate with a very much a legacy mainframe system with your access controls and identity access management. So I don't know how much time we have left, but a couple lessons learned around this. It was mentioned before, start small, start with the proof of concept around a process that you can kind of control, that's internal, to prove out the return on investment, and then take that POC to leadership with the ROI to gain that stakeholder buy-in from your executive leadership. Because I think what you want to avoid is pockets of excellence without having that plan to get your leadership on board. as well as sitting down with your IT folks to have them understand what it takes to get this into production. Because again, these are tools that need to be on the network to operate, and so you want to make sure your CISOs and CIOs are on board with instantiating. So, and then the other thing I will say is ensuring that you're creating that governance model in looking across the enterprise as you start to scale your automation opportunities. Because what we're seeing is as soon as one organization hears that another organization is doing it, they want a piece of it. And so, how do you start to govern that ingest process of automations? And I think that's critical as you start to scale beyond that POC phase. So. With that, I don't know if you want to kind of talk through an outlook we've got, Tony.
Yeah, well, I think we kind of covered just tremendously exciting time, tremendous opportunities to automate many of these. For those of us that work in the cybersecurity field and looking for opportunities to automate some of these tasks that a lot of us have had to do for many, many years, is just really exciting. And so we're looking forward to working on that. So I guess with that, Troy, do we have any time for questions, or do you want?
I think we have time for like one or two quick questions.
Okay.
So again, these gentlemen will be around
after
after the event. But anything folks want to immediately jump on from that presentation? In that case, I think we will move forward. And
sounds good, too.
Thank you both.
Great.
For the
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. So thanks, Troy.